A trip through Tuscany, the sunny province on Italy's northwest coast, is a treat for the senses. To spend time here is to experience the sight of Florence's glorious art and architecture, the fragrance of vineyards in Chianti, the taste of one of the most celebrated cuisines in the world, and the sound of the thundering hoofbeats at Sienna's Palio horse race. This is Tuscany. This is a land so blessed with natural and man-made beauty that one never forgets Tuscany's legacy as the cradle of the Renaissance. Everywhere are reminders that this is the place that nurtured the creative spirit that pulled the rest of Europe out of the Dark Ages. Even the term Renaissance, which means rebirth, is a Florentine word. It describes the revival of interest in art, music, literature, and philosophy after the creative drought of the medieval period. While there's no doubt that the movement began here in Florence, even today, scholars aren't sure why it happened in this particular place at this particular time. We do know that the Renaissance could not have happened without the influence and financial support of the Medicis. This legendary family of merchants and bankers are considered to be the greatest art patrons in European history. By establishing themselves as bankers of the papal curia in Rome, they amassed a fortune. They controlled Florence's culture and politics for over 200 years, and at the same time, commissioned works from the greatest artists of the period, including Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Donatello. A kind of intoxication with the beauty of Tuscany is so common that there's a word for it: the Stendhal syndrome. It's named after the French writer and diplomat who was so overwhelmed with the beauty of Florence, he became physically ill. The syndrome can best be avoided by taking it easy and resisting impulses to cram everything into a single visit. Like the heady wines it produces, Tuscany is a pleasure to be savored slowly. Italy occupies the famous boot-shaped peninsula sticking out into the Mediterranean Sea. Tuscany is in the north of the country, and Florence is where most travelers begin their visit. While there's no bad time to visit Tuscany, the best time to avoid the heat and crowds is early spring, before Easter, and late autumn at the height of the harvest. In describing Florence, or Firenze as the Italians call it, it's hard not to use superlatives, and they would all be true. It is indeed one of the most beautiful, most beloved, and most visited cities on earth. The river Arno, which bisects the city, has been part of the image of Florence since the Middle Ages. Crossing the river, the eye is drawn to the magnificent dome of the Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore. The Duomo, as it's known, dominates the skyline of Florence and the surrounding countryside as well. Although construction of the cathedral itself was begun in 1296, the dome was not added until more than a century later. In 1436, Florentine architect Filippo Brunelleschi designed and built the world's first double-vaulted dome without the use of the supporting buttresses which characterized churches of the Middle Ages. With this masterpiece of engineering, he changed the history of architecture. Next to the Duomo is the Bell Tower. Built 100 years earlier, it was soon outdated by its more famous neighbor. But it still offers a superb example of Greco-Roman architecture and stunning views of the city from the top. Facing the bell tower on the same square is the baptistry of San Giovanni, or St. John, the patron saint of Florence. The exterior is characterized by the elegant use of pink, green, and white marble. The baptistry is one of the oldest buildings in Florence, built sometime in the 6th or 7th century on the site of an ancient Roman palace. Inside, its vaulted ceilings are decorated with mosaics created by artisans in the 13th century. They portray Christ appearing on Judgment Day to condemn terrified sinners to hell and grant the righteous a place in heaven. A few blocks south of the Duomo is the Piazza della Signoria. With its fountains and statues, the square is very popular with visitors. Florentines are drawn here for another reason: official business. This is also the home of the Palazzo Vecchio, which since the 16th century has been Florence's city hall. Inside, we see the influence of the Medicis. The Palazzo was once the family home, and in true Medici style, they commissioned the top artists of the day, including Michelangelo and Giorgio Vasari, to decorate it. So Florentines who hurry through these halls for various dealings with the city are passing some of the greatest art of the Renaissance. One of the most interesting rooms of the Palazzo is the Hall of 500. Still in use for public ceremonies, its walls and ceilings are adorned with frescoes by Vasari, depicting various military victories of the Medicis. But even more intriguing than these paintings is the story of the art that isn't here. The Medicis commissioned both Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo to paint frescoes. Da Vinci used an experimental wax-based paint that melted off the walls, and Michelangelo dropped the project when he was called to Rome to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. If you want to see even more of the Medici's world, head to the San Lorenzo district, just north of the Duomo. The neighborhood takes its name from the Church of San Lorenzo, which was built early in the 15th century as the Medici family parish. The facade was never completed because the Medicis rejected the plans of the original designer, Michelangelo. However, inside you will find the delicate sandstone interior by Brunelleschi, the architect of the Duomo, and the work of one of the greatest artists of the period. Most notable are two bronze pulpits, the last work of Donatello before his death. A few blocks away, this bronze equestrian statue presides over the Piazza della Santissima Annunziata. On one side of its cloistered courtyard is the Church of Santissima Annunziata. Home to the Servite Order of Nuns since the 13th century, it's still a popular choice for Florentine society weddings. On the other side is Europe's first orphanage. The medallions of cherubic babies are a poignant reminder of its 500-year history as a shelter for abandoned children. With its wealth of artistic achievement inspired by the Renaissance, Florence is a city which not only appreciates its invaluable art, but makes enormous effort to protect it. Attracting the world's foremost craftsmen and artisans, Florence has become a center for art conservation and restoration. This tradition began during the rebuilding after the bombing of World War II. Then in November of 1966, the Arno River flooded the city, ruining or damaging thousands of works of art. An army of volunteers, many of them art students, was mobilized for the rescue effort, and then to begin the work of repair. As donations poured in from all over the world, Florence became a focal point of art conservation. Today, scores of individual artisans and two major laboratories pioneer restoration techniques, which are used by museums all over the world. However, not all of Florence's treasures are in churches and museums. Many are available for a price, because this is also a city of markets and antique dealers. Shopping in Florence is some of the best in the world, even for bargain hunters. A trip through flea markets like the Mercantino dei Chiomi makes it possible to take a bit of Florence home with you. Any qualms about leaving Florence for Siena should soon be banished by a look at the bountiful countryside along the way. Siena is just over an hour south by car or train. The trip takes you through the vineyards of Chianti, and although the area has been overrun with tourists in recent years, it's worth a stop at one of the hundreds of local wineries for a tasting of the specialty which gives the region its world-famous name. Siena is built on 3 hills, which provide an excellent vantage point for viewing the city. Unlike Florence, Siena was virtually untouched by the Renaissance. The bubonic plague, which hit Siena in 1348, wiped out half the population and the city's economic prosperity along with it. As a result, much of the city remains preserved in its medieval state. Siena is best known for its Palio, Italy's most famous festival. The Palio takes its name from the giant flag, which is the emblem of the celebration. It's a bareback horse race in medieval dress around Il Campo, Siena's public square. Held twice each summer, on July 2nd and August 16th. The Palio is the one exception to the rule that Tuscany is best seen in the spring or fall. The race is a contest between the various districts within the city. The riders are hired professionals, sort of Italian cowboys. Although both the riders and the horses are chosen by lot, these long-standing rivalries are fierce and the celebration of the winners jubilant. Even when it's not the site of the Palio, Il Campo is the focus of town life in Siena. Like everyone else here, you'll find yourself gravitating toward it, and you won't go wrong if you use it as a reference point in exploring the city. As the Palio represents the pride of each district, the Palazzo Pubblico, also in Il Campo, represents Siena's pride in its civic independence. Now a museum that houses some of the city's most valued works of art. The people of Siena regard the Palazzo as a concrete symbol of the city's history as an independent city-state, never dominated by any lord or the church. Nowhere is this better illustrated than in the Sala della Pace, or Room of Peace, with its medieval frescoes entitled Allegories of Good and Bad Government. This is where Siena's town council met, and it's not hard to imagine that these murals were chosen to remind the city fathers of how their actions directly affected the well-being of the city. A few blocks to the west is the city's main cathedral. As in Florence, it's called the Duomo. It's an unmistakable part of the landscape, rising in pale marble against a sea of red rooftops. The Duomo is primarily the work of Nicola and Giovanni Pisano, a father and son team who were among the most important sculptors of the period. They served as architects of the building and crafted its ornately pink marble facade. The Duomo's most unusual feature is its unfinished exterior. 100 years after it was built in 1215, the leading citizens of Siena, motivated by a rivalry with Florence, decided to enlarge it. Outside walls were built with plans to double its size. However, the project was one of the many casualties of the plague of 1348. By the time the disease had run its course, the city had run out of money, and the construction was abandoned forever. Despite these thwarted ambitions, the interior of the Duomo contains some of the artistic treasures of Siena's golden age, the 13th century. The most important work is this pulpit, depicting the life of Christ. It was carved in the style of the late Middle Ages, known as Gothic. Here again we see the work of the Pisanos. With this pulpit, the elder Pisano was the first to establish sculpture as an art form in its own right, and not just an adornment for architecture. These stained glass windows in the Duomo date from 1288 and are the oldest surviving examples of stained glass made in Italy. This enormous room off the main aisle of the Duomo was built in the late 15th century as a library for Aeneas Silvius Piccolomini, who was better known as Pope Pius II. The murals on the walls were commissioned by his nephew to pay tribute to his uncle's life as a writer and diplomat, as well as a clergyman. The elder Piccolomini was considered a great patron of the Renaissance, and this library is one of the few places in Siena where you can still see the Italian Renaissance in full bloom. With its Gothic architecture and narrow medieval streets, Siena is a perfect counterpoint to Florence. Here is the place to see Italy as it was before the Renaissance changed the world. Leaving Siena, it's a short trip to the coast and the port city of Pisa, known worldwide for its freakishly tilting bell tower. Actually, everything on this sand-based plaza is sinking. The tower began to tilt early into its construction in 1173, and for the past 800 years, the world's best engineering minds have not been able to solve the problem. During the Renaissance, Galileo, Pisa's most famous native son, dropped weights from the tower to demonstrate the principles of gravity. Today, even he might not be able to get to the top. In 1990, Pisan officials reluctantly closed it to the public for safety reasons. Pisa's most beautiful and revered buildings, including the Leaning Tower, are on the lovely Campo dei Miracoli, or Field of Miracles. Unlike the typical Italian town square, which is paved, this is a wide, grassy meadow, and some consider it the most beautiful campo in Italy. The Duomo, adjacent to the tower, reflects Pisa's glory days as a wealthy maritime power of the Middle Ages. In 1064, more than 300 years before the Medicis brought prosperity and power to Florence, Pisans had the resources to build this monument to their faith. A highlight of the interior is a pulpit dating from 1302, which is the last, and some say the best, of the great pulpits by Nicola and Giovanni Pisano. It is one of the few treasures to survive a devastating fire here in 1595. The baptistry, the third important monument on the Campo, is the largest in Italy. It combines the Gothic style of the late Middle Ages and the Romanesque style, which is based on classical Roman architecture. The baptistry is also known for its superb acoustics. It's said that choirs performing here can be heard for miles. Although most visitors come here to see the Leaning Tower, Pisa has much more to offer than that picture postcard cliché. If you take the time to venture beyond the tourist mecca of the tower, you'll find streets and plazas which reflect the history of this once dominant and still thriving coastal city. Like Florence, Pisa is built along the banks of the Arno. A lovely way to end a visit here is to stroll along the river. The Arno is no longer a major waterway, but it's still lined with gracious palazzi dating from the days when Pisa was a maritime power. After Florence, Siena, and Pisa, it would be tempting to think you've hit the high points of Tuscany, but it would be a mistake to overlook Lucca. Just an hour's drive northeast of Pisa, Lucca is blessed with lovely parks and gardens and locals who love the outdoors and would rather walk or ride bikes than pollute their city with cars. Entering the historic center at the Porta San Pietro, the main gate through Lucca's medieval walls, you come upon the first of the city's many surprises. These fortress-like ramparts were built as a defensive measure in the 16th century. The walls were never needed for protection, but were later landscaped with lovely chestnut trees and now make a sky-high park which circles the city. Lucca is also known as the birthplace of the great composer Giacomo Puccini. A statue faces the childhood home of the author of such operas as Madame Butterfly, Tosca, and La Boheme. And a painting in a local pastry shop reminds visitors that this is the neighborhood where the young Puccini sat in cafes sampling delicacies such as these. The city also celebrates the world-renowned composer with a music festival every September, which showcases Puccini's work. Like most Italian cities, Lucca has a main cathedral called the Duomo. The Duomo here is known for its asymmetrical facade. It was built between two existing buildings, giving it the look of being squeezed into the site. Inside, the cathedral boasts several treasures worth seeing. The most famous is a wooden crucifix called the Volto Santo. Its reputation as a relic from the crucifixion drew Christian pilgrims here for years. In truth, it was probably carved sometime in the 13th century. Among the works above the altar are a Madonna by Domenico Ghirlandaio and a Last Supper by Tintoretto. There are many other churches and museums here, each with its own art treasures. But Lucca is a city which can be enjoyed just by walking through its parks and neighborhoods. An interesting counterpoint to Lucca's city park on top of the fortress walls is this botanical garden under a church. These gardens are planted under the walls of the Church of Santa Reparta. They are tended by a rotating staff of volunteers, with each neighborhood of the city taking its turn. In another corner of this city, this street right inside the gate of San Gervasio provides a bit of Venice with its canal-lined, picturesque townhouses. American novelist Henry James is said to have described Lucca as overflowing with beauty and plenty. The same can be said for all of Tuscany. To be dazzled by it is to be in good company. The world's greatest artists and writers have come here searching for the same spirit which fueled the Renaissance. This seems especially true of the English and American writers. Beginning in the early 1800s, scores of them came seeking refuge from their frigid climates. What they discovered was their own corner of paradise. The beauty of this land found its way not only into their hearts, but into their stories and poems as well. Perhaps the best way to leave Tuscany is to remember that antidote to the Stendhal syndrome. By saving enough of Tuscany's pleasures for another time, surely you will be compelled to return.